Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College. I've been going over the 19 chapters of PowerPoints from the Murox MySQL 2nd edition book, which is going to be used for the online class 152-147 Relational Database Development for the Spring 2016 semester. And as mentioned, I've gone through the first 16 chapters, so now we're going to do chapters 17 through 19. In those chapters, there will not be any homework on those. As you can see here by the title for Chapter 17, it's an introduction to database administration. And they mention here that the chapter begins by presenting an overview of database administration, including the responsibilities of a data administrator and the various types of files used by a database. The chapter then presents some practical skills you can use to get started with database administration. So, again, we'll talk about some of this stuff, but we'll talk about it more in generalities. And I'm not going to, again, go through this stuff with MySQL Workbench. All right? So, here are some of the responsibilities of a database administrator. All right? Now, you do see the two things in there that say design a database and create a database. That is no guarantee that the database administrator is the one who actually designs and creates the database. It would always depend on the size of the company. If you work for a small company, you might be the programmer, you might be the database administrator, you might be the security guy or gal, you might be everything in there. If you work for a large company, you might be part of a team, and if you're a database administrator, you probably will not be the only administrator. There'll probably be a team of administrators. In that case, probably you would not be designing a database or creating a database. All right? So again, as always, it just depends. All right? They talk about monitoring a server and configuring a server. All right? Well, again, there could be multiple servers if you're talking about a big enough installation. And then security, maintaining user accounts, securing the server and the associated databases. Backing up a database. Again, that's something that you might do if you're a database administrator, or, again, if you have a big enough company, you're working for a big enough company and you have enough administrators, it might be somebody else's responsibility to be backing up and restoring the database, migrating data to another database. As always, it just depends. And there's some miscellaneous things that are listed there also. So, as we look at the types of database files, as you can see here, we've got configuration files. And as mentioned on page 465, they contain the configure options that the MySQL server uses to set its defaults when it starts. For Windows, this file is my.ini. You got a data file, files that define the tables, the indices, and other database objects. Log files, which contain information that's written, or in other words, logged by the database server. In other words, it would have, for every database, it would have all of the inserts, updates, and deletes that have been attempted. You've got log files. Okay, we just mentioned what a log file is, but types of log files. There's general log files that records client connections, SQL statements received from clients, etc. There's errors. That's the one you're probably going to want to keep on all the time, if at all possible. As mentioned on page 465, that's a text file that contains messages about server startup and shutdown, in addition to error messages. There is slow query, which contains SQL statements that take a long time to execute. Now, the reason that might be important is, as an administrator, you might have to go in there and take a look at that, because if it turns out that the application is running very, very slow, those are the kind of statements that we'd want to look at optimizing to make it run better or faster. Binary log files. They contain a record of changes that have been made to the database. relay log files. They're binary files that are used on a slave machine to relay any changes that have been made on a master. Okay, typically that's only necessary when you're doing replication. All right, they show the base and database directories. So in other words, if you're on a Windows machine, this is where you're going to look for your data. Okay. All right, I'm not going to again go over the stuff in here that they go through with MySQL. All right, but I'm going to jump up here all the way. If you're following along in the book, I'm jumping up all the way. This is the same thing that's shown on page in this slide, and the next slide is what's shown on page 477 in the text. All right, because what the author mentions is another way that you can set system variables is to use a text editor to edit this configuration file directly yourself. So what you see right here is an excerpt, as mentioned, from a typical configuration file for a Windows system. So to edit this type of configuration file directly, you'd use a text file. Again, in a Windows setup, this would be called my.ini. Now, it's possible if you try to if you try to run this file, that you might get an error message, or you might get a message telling you that you don't have permissions. If that's the case, you may need to start your text editor as an administrator. And they mentioned to do that on a Windows system, you can right-click the icon that starts the text editor and choose the Run as Administrator command. If you want more information on this, you can go out to the reference manual for MySQL and get additional information. All right. What they're talking about here, this is from page 479 in the text, is how to use the set statement to set system variables dynamically. Now, the advantage of doing this is you can set these variables as the program is running, so you don't need to restart the server for the changes to take effect. It allows you to go and do some open experimentation with these variables. Then if you want to make the changes permanent, you can add them to the configuration file that we'll get to in just a minute. So this first example here uses a set statement with the global keyword to set the variable named, this one here. This sets auto commit, all right, at the global level. It sets it on, in other words, it sets it to 1. The second one turns it off, which sets it to 0. And the third sets it to the default, and typically the default value is for it to be on. The next couple of examples that you see down here with max connections, they set the maximum number of connections for the server, not for the session. And then you've got a thing in here that shows table size. When you're specifying a number of bytes, you can use them in kilobytes, megabytes, or gigabytes, but not directly. You have to use expressions like what are shown here. So you'll notice here this syntax that they show for getting these variables, all right, is shown in the examples that are right here. Select @ sign, variable name. Why? Because to get the value of a system variable, you code 2 @ signs, and then either the global keyword or the session keyword followed by a period and the name of the name of the variable inside of a select statement, as you can see right there. And it'll show you the values of those particular variables. More stuff from SQL. From MSQL or MySQL Workbench. All right. System variables for enabling logging. This is on pages 480 and 481 in the text. The general log enables the general log with a default name of hostname.log. The general log file equal log name specifies the name of a general log file. The log error equal log name enables the error log. If you don't specify a name, MySQL uses a name of hostname.err. The log bin equal log name enables a binary log. The slow query log enables the slow query log with the default name of hostname hyphen slow.log. And the slow query log file equal log name specifies the name of the slow log name. So you can use these different logs to monitor the database, find and fix errors, restore data, and optimize the database. The problem is if you have every log file open and you've got databases that go through a lot of activity, the log files can take up a significant amount of disk space. And logging can also compromise the security of the data if you don't secure the files properly. All right, so typically things that are associated with errors are what you're going to want to make sure you keep on. And the other ones, I guess you more or less would put on an as-needed type of basis. Some of the system variables set in the configuration file are shown here. All right, and how they're set, how they were set. We just mentioned them, but there's examples of how they're set. Some system variables apply to multiple types of logs, like output equal target and warnings. The output equal target sends the output for the general log and the slow query log to a file, a table, or nowhere. The log warnings determines what errors are logged. The default is 1, which logs aborted connections. If you set it to 0, that'll disable the option. If you want to log both aborted connections and access denied errors, you then set the log to 2. Notice there's system variables for binary log. The first one deletes binary log files that are more than a specified number of days old. The default on that is 0, which means don't delete files. The max sets the maximum size of the binary log. The default is 1 gig. Finally, that system variable that's there for a slow query log sets the number of seconds that define a slow query. Again, remember a slow query is one that's taking too long to execute. The default is 10 seconds. And there's some examples here of how that's indeed used. This is more stuff on MySQL Workbench, okay? All right. Now remember one thing with a binary log file. A binary log file, since it's binary, can't be read directly by a text editor. Hopefully you heard that. I want to say it again. A binary log file cannot be read directly by a text editor. All right. So to solve this problem, you can start a command line and use the MySQL binlog program to convert the binary file to a text file. All right? And they show how to do this for Windows and for Mac or Unix. And then they show what's going to happen. This excerpt basically is going to show you the kind of output that you're going to get. All right. Strategies for managing logs, as we're just about to the end of the chapter here. Log rotation. It applies to text-based logs, which are the general logs, the error logs, and the slow query logs. To rotate logs, you can save the current log under a new name and let the server create a new log file. Then you can delete any old log files that are no longer needed. This is going to be different depending on the size of the installation, trouble you may be having, and anything else. With the age-based expiration, this applies to a binary log. you can use the expire log days system variable that's shown in the book on right here to delete old binary logs after a specified number of days. Now again, I'm just going over some of the high points in here. There by no means do I have the kind of expertise to be a database administrator. I'm just hitting some of the high points in Chapter 17. And that's it for Chapter 17. So finish with that one, and next we're going to go into Chapter 18, which is on how to secure a database. And I'll be back with that shortly.